I want to speak to you on a message entitled, Climb the Mountain. This church is full of spiritual mountain climbers. You know, I don't care so much about how fast we climb or whether our mountain is bigger than somebody else's mountain. What I'm more concerned about is that we are climbing, that we are mountain climbers. You know, from the first day that we started this church, we've been climbing. Every single week, we've been climbing and we've been encouraging others to climb with us. I like what it says in Micah chapter 4 in verse 2. It says, "Come, let us climb up the mountain of the Lord to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways and that we walk in his paths." Why do we climb the mountain? Because we've got questions. Why do we climb the mountain? Because we've got difficulties. We've got things that we need to know about. We need to have a game plan. We need to know how to be victorious and how to overcome and how to live out successful marriages and families and live out our jobs in a way that we can be successful in them. Some of us as business owners, we need to climb the mountain of the Lord because we need to know how he wants us personally, not just to be successful in our work, but to be his disciples, to be his followers. And we know that real life comes from God. But I want to submit to you today, it comes a whole lot faster to those that are climbing the mountain. If we become mountain climbers, that is when God is speaking to us. Mountain experiences will have a significant impact on your life. Mountaintop experiences they're just built into our nature. How did they get there? God put them there. God created us to be mountain climbers. How many have ever played King of the Hill growing up? You played King of the Hill. Yeah, see, so that's in us, you know, that we want to be mountain climbers, not just mountain climbers, but we want to be king of the mountain climbers. And we want to be the ones that win. That's that desire that God puts inside of us, not just to climb the mountain, but to be winners. And it's during that mountain climbing experience that we get closer to God, that we learn more about God's nature. They have this thing called tribal wars at youth every year when they go to youth camp, breakthrough camp. And I got to tell you, these guys, they go crazy playing King of the Mountain. I mean, just absolutely, they are nuts. And as a matter of fact, it's because of tribal wars, the reason why this church has great insurance. Because they give us a reason to look over our policies every single year. And I got to tell you, guys love to play King of the Mountain. I love to play King of the Mountain. But a couple of years ago, I was watching the girls at Breakthrough Camp play King of the Mountain. There ain't no way you'd get me to play against those girls. They fight like cats. Have you ever been in a fight with a cat? I mean, you ever look at a mean cat and you know, you're thinking, I'm gonna reach down and pat that cat, and they're just like, I mean, it's like, there is no way. I watched those girls play and I thought, oh my gosh, we need to increase the limits on our insurance policy. These girls are mean. So it's not just guys. Girls have that desire to be mountain climbers, to be winners on the top of the mountain. It comes from God. It's natural for us to want to win. You know, we always try to teach people it's not about winning, it's just about playing the game. I tell our kids that too when we're playing soccer. And then I walk back, I'm like, oh gosh, I hope we win this game. I just hope we win this game. I mean, you can't hide it, can you? It's in you because God put it in you. You're mountain climbers. He wants you to learn how to be winners in life. Too often, people just stop climbing. They stop climbing and they stop learning how to win in life. They stop hearing God speaking to them. I will tell you, you'll hear God a whole lot quicker climbing the mountain, climbing in the difficult spots of life, climbing through the problems, climbing through the temptation of sin, climbing through the things that the enemy brings to try to hold us off from the mountain. We still face it, but if you keep on climbing, that's where you get strength. That's where you hear the voice of the Lord. But too many people, they just stop climbing when it gets tough. Maybe it's they stop looking for a mate. Well, I'm 21 years old, never gonna get married. Or they're looking for a job and they give up on looking for a job. Don't give up on looking for a job and wait for somebody to call you. Start knocking on those doors. Start thinking about the place that you would like to work and start knocking on the doors. I'll never forget when we were designing our domes, the big domes that are going to be up on the hill, and I wanted to get this guy named Lee Gray. He's the designer of them, and he has designed over 22,000 churches and performing arts theaters, and I wanted him, and so I tried to get him, but I couldn't get him. And then I would send an email to him, and they were too busy. And then I would talk to the company, one of the companies that he was working with in Monolithic Domes, and I was like, man, I really want to get a hold of this guy. You tell me he's the best, and he's the guy I want, but it's hard to. Yeah, boy, he's really busy. He's a world-renowned architect. And I said, well, that's who I want, is a world-renowned guy. Too often people give up. They give up on climbing the mountain. And so, because I couldn't get a response out of him, I just decided to get a plane ticket and go knock on his door in Utah. And when I showed up, knocked on the door, his son came out and asked me who I was. And I said, I'm the guy that keeps emailing you, calling you, trying to find out if you'll be my architect. And he says, well, come meet my dad. And so I got to meet him, and he said, you want to go out for a hamburger? And I said, yeah. And he says, so we went out for a hamburger, and he sat across the table from me. He says, you just don't quit, do you? I said, no, I want you to be the one that helps us design our future. And I told him about the vision. When I told him about the vision, he says, I can't wait to do it. And he got involved with us. You can't stop climbing your mountain. You can't stop climbing if you face opposition. Press through. Keep climbing. Keep reaching for God and the things that He has placed in your heart. If you got to dig your way there like a cat, go ahead. Keep climbing your mountain. Now, climbing mountains takes effort, doesn't it? It takes energy. It takes determination. But God does His best work in your life when you are climbing. A business guy said to me just recently, he says, I bet now that you've got that church built, as long as it took you and everything, now that you've got it built, you're just kind of kicking back, ain't you? All right. It didn't even sound good to me. I mean, I like a vacation, but to kick back from life and the pursuit of vision and the pursuit of God's calling on this church, I'm like, no. I was like, no way. And I said, no, we got lots more to do. And one of the questions he asked me was, how much you spent on this building? And I said, it's $3 million. He couldn't even, as a business guy, he couldn't wrap his head around that. He said, well, that just doesn't happen everywhere, local in these parts of the world. And I said, well, sure it does. It happened to us. And he says, well, what's some of the next things that you're going to do? And I just thought, I'm not taking him through the whole vision. He was kind of a pessimist. And I said, well, we got $30 more million worth of work to do. Lots of stuff there. And he was just like, like that's ever gonna happen. And the conversation just deceased. It was over. And I walked away and I thought, man, today I got, now not that he was the devil, but this is the spirit of the enemy to tell you that the mountain you're climbing, there is no way in you know what that you can get there, but I can tell you there is a way in heaven that you can get there, and you cannot listen to the voices that tell you to stop climbing. So keep climbing. What is the personal mountains in your life that you are climbing? Now, I know everybody here in this church is part of the Airborne family. We're climbing some great mountains. And I'm so excited about the vision that is ahead of us. I love it that every Sunday we get to come and worship in this building. But we won't always be in this building. Why? Because vision. Listen, we desire more the vision than we do a building to worship in. We desire more the God that we worship than the music we worship to in this building. There's so much more that God has for us to do. But I want to ask you, what is your personal mountain that you're climbing? Maybe you don't have one. And today you would say, wow, you know what? I need to have a personal mountain to climb. And I need to climb that mountain just like our church climbs the mountain of their vision. And that's what we endeavor to do. Because listen, if the church isn't winning, there really isn't much hope for the earth. Because we are the ones that God has called to be the head and not the tail, to lead and be the winners and be the ones that know true life and know victory in life. We're the ones that set the example. Let me tell you, Airborne Church is setting the example of winning in life for our city and for the region around us, and maybe throughout the U.S., maybe in parts of the world, in other countries. I don't know. God can do whatever He wants with it. I don't got my focus all on that, but what I got my focus on is I'm going to keep climbing. God can do whatever He wants with it, but I'm going to keep on climbing the mountain that He gave me. So you take that and you look at that and you say, man, I need a mountain to climb. Yes, you do. And you can climb it just like we're climbing our mountain. Last year, after Mario and Emmy, they finished up Bible school, Mario and I, we were having a talk in my garage. He might remember this because he was trying to figure out all that he was going to do. And I said, well, Mario, what is it that you're passionate about? What is it that you really want to do? And man, it was like lighting off a firecracker. I mean, he just started telling me, man, the one thing that I want to do is I'm just passionate about serving God and serving the church and seeing the church grow. And I just want to do whatever I can. And you know, Mario, he's got no passion in life. You know, he doesn't get excited about anything. He was just all lit up. Like he just lit up the garage. And you know, Mario will tell you one thing, but tell you from every different angle what he thinks about that one thing, and it'll take you an hour to do it. And that day it took him an hour. But I love a person's passion around one central focus. The one thing that Bible school taught him was to have a passion to serve God and help others. I got to tell you, if you got a vision like that, you got a great vision. If you got a mountain like that to climb every day that you wake up, who am I going to help? Who am I going to help with my personal relationship with God? Who am I going to help with what God has done in my life? Who am I going to help with the mountains that I've climbed, with the valleys that I've gone through, and the difficulties that I've pressed through? Who am I going to help? I'm passionate about that. If you got that kind of vision, that's the best vision that you can have. But everybody needs a personal mountain to climb. Jesus did His best work on mountains. Jesus overcame the devil on a high mountain when He was being tempted by the devil up on a high mountain to say, if you bow down and worship me, I'll give you all of this. And you know, when you get up on your mountain and you start climbing your mountain, you will be tempted. It's not that you're climbing your mountain that you won't face any difficulties. It's that you are climbing your mountain that you are facing difficulty. But I got to tell you, when you're climbing your mountain, you are strengthening your personal self and your personal relationship and walk with the Lord. That's where you become strong. That's where you start to hear the voice of the Lord. If you want to know what to do about difficulties in life, it's a lot easier to find out and have the word of the Lord and have the plan of God to be the overcomer and the victorious person that God wants you to be when you're climbing. Because when you're falling, or when you give up, or when you just head back down the mountain, you say it's not worth it, God could be screaming at you and you can't hear him. Because all you're hearing is your self-doubt. All you're hearing was, I can't make it. All you're hearing was, I must have got the wrong vision. I want to tell you today to keep climbing. Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. And Jesus says, come up higher. Jesus is always asking us that. You look all through Scripture. He doesn't say come down lower because he's not there. He says come up higher. Now he'll come down to your valley to do one thing, to get you back on the mountain, to get you back climbing. But his voice is always coming from the mountain. That's why when you ever hear something that says keep going, it's not him behind you trying to push you. He's not going to do the work. But he'll encourage you, and he'll give you the spiritual might and power to conquer your mountain. But his voice is always coming from up the mountain. You know, you get some people come to me and they'll say, man, I don't know if this is the voice of the Lord or the voice of the enemy, but yesterday I was just having this impression on me to go and help a family next door. Their car was broke down, and I know a little bit about cars, and I wanted to go ask them, but I've never talked to them before, and I'm just trying to find out, if that's really the voice of the Lord or not. And I'm like, oh, the devil had to have told you that. Isn't it so obvious when God speaks to us, and that it's not the devil? And let me tell you, in your flesh, you will not think up good things. You just won't wake up and have a great plan for the whole day, a whole line of things to do. I'm going to tell you, every good and perfect thing that you think of comes from above. So if you have a good thought, or you have a good desire, or you have somebody that you want to help, you didn't think that up yourself. That came from God. I would act on that. That's a mountain. That's a personal mountain. I would just cross that road and go to that neighbor, and I would climb that mountain and see what God does with it. But them are the mountains that seem so hard to climb. The simple things in life that we can do to help and benefit other people from the relationship that we have with the Lord. Them are the hardest mountains to climb. And I'll tell you, they'll be the biggest mountains you climb, is just to walk across the lawn to a neighbor's yard and begin to show, your relationship with the Lord and your kindness and your generosity, and just be a great neighbor. Most of our conversations with Jesus are down in the valley when we are downcast or we are in trouble. Because isn't that when we call on the Lord? And I'm not saying you shouldn't. If you found yourself stuck down in a valley somewhere, feeling like you can't get out, everything is crashed in around you, listen, still call upon the Lord. I'm not telling you not to do that. But I am telling you that his voice is going to come from above. It won't be phone a friend. It won't be text a friend. You probably won't get the same answers from the friends that you have that you will from God. So I say, go to God. You will hear the voice of the Lord. You will hear, if you call upon him, the Bible says that he hears you. And he will speak to you. And he will help you. But I will say this, our relationship with the Lord is more identified by the conversations we have with him in the middle of our trouble than the conversations we have with him when we're climbing the mountain. And the reason for that is some people just don't have a mountain to climb. And so therefore, all their conversation with the Lord is just getting out of trouble, trying to get to the next day, just trying to make it through another day. And yesterday was bad, today will probably be bad, and tomorrow I'll have to call on the Lord again. And yes, keep calling on him, but find your personal mountain to climb so that you can start hearing the word of the Lord, so that the things that you go through and the valleys you constantly travel through that seem so much longer than what they should be. I'm going to tell you, if you get a personal vision for a mountain to climb, you'll hear the word of the Lord a whole lot more. And you'll hear that word that is a word of winning, a word of overcoming, a word of you're going to make it, a word of you are going to make a difference, not only in your life, but in your marriage life, in your family's life, at your workplace. And all of a sudden, you start to feel some strength inside of you, and you start to get some self-esteem, and you start to become the mountain climber that God's called you to be. And then you start climbing up the mountain, and you start hearing the voice of the Lord like you've never heard him before. Jesus had taken his disciples up on a mountain. I want to read this one to you. In Matthew chapter 17, it says, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as the light. And just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Now, I want you to see what happened. 3 went up the mountain, and they're going with Jesus. They're following Jesus. They're following him in the flesh. Okay, and a lot of times we see our mountains as just the flesh, things that we're trying to overcome. But keep following Jesus' lead, keep following his voice, and if you keep climbing, you'll see something you've never seen before. Jesus will work in such a way that he'll turn your life upside down in ways that you never thought was even going to come your way. And this is what happened to Peter, James, and John. They're climbing up the mountain with Jesus, and all of a sudden, he becomes somebody they didn't expect him to be. How many ever met up with the Jesus that you didn't know he could do that kind of stuff? Like a miracle came your way, a bill got paid by somebody that you didn't know, a blessing came, and you're like, wow, I never expected that to happen. But you can expect those things to happen if you're a mountain climber. If you start getting close to God, I'm going to tell you, he'll reveal himself in ways that'll just surprise you day after day. Why? Because he's like water springing forth from a desert, and you wonder, where did that come from? It's so refreshing. It is so amazing what Jesus does in my life. And this is what was happening to the 3 disciples. They walked with Jesus every day and didn't expect him to transfigure. All of a sudden, he turns as white as a cloud, and he's hovering before them. And Peter, he says, whoa, Jesus, I didn't know that was going to happen to you. And he's just all mesmerized by what's going on. And then all of a sudden, Moses and Elijah showed up. Like, whoa, you're bringing people back from the dead, and there they are right in front of us, and now here we are having a conversation. Like, now Peter is saying, but Jesus, should we set up camp? We got 2 more than what we had, and we only got 3 tents, and we could go and we could get more tents. I mean, what are we going to do on this mountain? I mean, this is like, he's like, Peter, just be quiet. Be quiet and listen. And we want to read it there in verse 5, because God begins to speak out of the cloud. And he says to the disciples, this is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. I had that kind of moment when Beth and I was on Prayer Mountain. Up until this is before we started the church, and up until the time that we were on Prayer Mountain, we didn't have a vision for starting a church. Pastor Steve Kelly pointed at me at a meeting. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. And he said, the Lord wanted me to tell you there's a great church in you. Well, I wasn't so sure I believed in that, but I got to tell you, God began to shake my knees, and I just had fellowship with the carpet for the next half hour, just, giving my life over to God and saying, God, use me whatever way that you want me to. But at that point, I was only listening to what other people were saying and prophesying over me what was in our future. It wasn't until we climbed the mountain in Phoenix, Arizona, Tommy Barnett, and he says, there's a vision in you, and you're the one that needs to know it. And I realized at that time, I did not know the vision. Because just starting a church was not something that I enjoyed saying. Because to me, church was not a thing of health, not a thing that I could get excited about. I mean, I grew up in church. I've only been in 2 churches. I've had 17 different pastors. I've been through 7 splits in churches. So, I mean, this is not exciting for me to start a church. And so I had not heard the voice of the Lord yet myself. I knew God was calling me to something, but it was up on the mountain that Beth and I, we began to pray and we began to weep. And with my arm around her, and we were sitting on a rock, I turned my focus towards Martinsburg. As a pilot, I knew exactly the direction that was, and all of a sudden, I started to get a vision of this property, and I knew that this property was side the interstate. I didn't know it was actually this property, but I saw a property side the interstate, and I was like, oh my goodness, God, what are you going to do with that? And God began to show me the church. God began to show me the church growing in unique ways that I had not even thought of the church growing up until this time. But when you climb the mountain, when you're a mountain climber, God will make things clear to you that you've never seen before. But you have to be a mountain climber to get that kind of revelation. They don't come in the valley. They come when you're climbing the mountain, when you're headed toward the voice of the Lord. Remember when our children and Beth and I, it was Emily and Ethan, we went up on this hill up here after Lucille had given us 19 acres to build this church on. And we went up on that hill and we took these capsules and we started to fill them full of dirt, hundreds of them. And then we brought them back to a Sunday morning service. And we kind of made a production around it, and we said, well, we'll put dirt from the property in the tractor, and then we'll put all these capsules in the bucket, and then ushers will come up, and we'll hand them out, and we'll tell people this is the dirt the Lord has given us, and we'll pray over it. It was all a nice little thing until the tractor rolled in. And when the tractor rolled in with the dirt and all those capsules that were full of dirt, I started to get a revelation of what we was really involved with. And I looked at that dirt, and I remember saying it like it was yesterday. And I said to the church, that's holy ground. That's holy ground. And what God will do on that soil will only be limited by our own belief, by our own vision and lack of vision. What God wants to do is amazing. And look at what God is doing on this soil. You don't get that by just crying out to God. You get that by climbing the mountain. You get that by grabbing a shovel. You get that by getting on a tractor. You get that by turning over the soil. You get that by capsulizing it and praying over it and believing God. And then you get others to join in with you and you say, I've got a mountain that we should climb. I can see the vision of the Lord. And when you start to do that, God begins to make clear what He wants you to do. And you hear the voice of the Lord. And all things that are now in front of you become transfigured. Do you need your marriage transfigured? Do you need the relationship with your children transfigured? Is there something at work, some goal that you have that needs to be transfigured? You'll get it by climbing the mountain towards Jesus.